Stroop effect is a psycholinguistics thing where the canonical demonstration is you see a word for a colour, but in a different colour.
Yeah.
And you have to say the colour it's in and not the word.
For example, you'll see, green written in pink ink, and you've got to say pink when you see that.
Yeah.
And
what your brain automatically reads it.
Yeah, what you find is that it's really, really difficult for people to do that. So there's this sort of hesitation, this measurable hesitation when someone is asked to read it's called an incongruent sort of color word, where, green is written in pink and you've got to say pink. Whereas if you're just told to read the color that's written, so, read green instead of pink, that's much easier because your brain is kind of automatically just reading anything that it sees.
And what feels so interesting about that is that presumably, I mean, you may be able to correct me, Tom or Corey, as far as I remember it, our sort of general, because of the rate of evolution, we haven't changed too much since we sort of invented written language, or since written language became so prevalent. And so what's so interesting about that is that we've almost we've got an automatic response, but that seems like more like it would be trained response as opposed to a response that our brain would naturally do if we weren't able to read.
I don't know. Take this with a massive, massive grain of salt, because this is me trying to remember something I did for a high school project when I was not even 17. So massive grain of salt here. From what I remember, it is learned, but also your brain is very good at adapting to language. And because you learn it from such a young age, and it's just very ingrained in your brain, more so than sort of looking at a color and saying what that color is. I feel like I'm pretty sure we don't know specifically exactly why we see the effects, but we have some solid ideas. Basically, most of science. We don't know exactly why, but we got some idea,
I mean, that's true of pretty much everything to do with the brain at this point. We do know from studies of brain-damaged patients that there is definitely a linguistic area or a couple of linguistics areas in the brain. There is a language processing zone that is usually in the same place, as I understand it. More than that, I mean, at that point, it is literally brain surgery to try and figure out any more than that.
I guess what I mean is that so you're saying, Tom, that we have a linguistics area of the brain, but we don't necessarily have a written words area of the brain. I would presume that something in our visual system is turning words into language, and then that's being passed to the language area of the brain. In the same way that we don't have an area of the brain that deals with the icons on a computer. We've created computers to work and interface with our visual systems. And it almost feels like, because written language, at least being as prevalent as it is a fairly new thing with the invention of the printing press and the invention of pens. And it wouldn't have been several 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years ago. I'm pulling numbers out my ass here. That we would have had loads and loads of language. It's almost like written language, like writing is an evolved way of using the circuitry that already exists in our brains, rather than, for example, spoken language is a part of our brain's hardware. We would evolve language if left on we evolve spoken language if left on an island with 20 people. We'd come up with a way of communicating, but we wouldn't necessarily start writing things down to each other. And we wouldn't necessarily invent computers with icons automatically, but we would come up with an audible version of language, or maybe a sign version of language.
We could come up with sort of signs to mean certain things, but it's when you start getting sort of the grammar and the specific syntax of, how you put words together and how you build sentences, that it then sort of becomes language. Right?
I mean, you have just described the unethical experiment that every sort of advanced linguist would love to run at some point.
Yes.
That we cannot test for things like that, barring a real-life disaster where a load of infants get marooned on an island and somehow survive.
Yeah.
We just can't know that.
If you think about it this way, right? If we look at, say, previous episodes that we've done on how people become cyborgs, right? And they, the guy that had this sort of pad on his back instead of having eyes that saw things and went straight to his brain, he had a camera on his head that had this pad on his back that depressed, these little sort of it pressed down on his back in particular ways whenever the camera sort of sensed something, and through that he then gained sight through a camera on his head and a sort of mat of little pressure points on his back. So what I'm saying here is that your brain is able to adapt to different sort of inputs, and when it comes to written language, I think, and this is just me saying I think it's probably something somewhat similar. Because obviously from the very start of your life, you're just being inundated with all of that information. So your brain is probably pretty bloody good at taking that in and understanding it in that particular way. Yeah. In the same sense that if you were to take a kid, pop a camera on their head, stick a mat of sort of pressure points attached to the camera on their back, they'd probably start using that as almost not exactly equal to visual information, but it would be pretty up there in terms of the kid's brain.
And it wires round to the visual cortex.
Yeah. The brain is an incredible pattern matching system. Psycholinguistics is one of the subfields of linguistics, and you'll find time and time again that people learning new. It doesn't even have to be a language, like learning Morse code. If you are starting to pick up the really high speed stuff, there are still people who do competitive Morse code speed trials and things like that. And if they're listening at a particular speed, they're not hearing ... and then working that out in their head. They're hearing the patterns and just writing down as if you were translating from someone dictating to you and writing it down.
Wow.
So the form doesn't matter. The brain just pattern matches, and after a while you get used to hearing, okay, I know that's the. I know that's... And if someone sends you a word or just nonsense characters, an acronym, something like that, you might have to slow down and think about it for a moment. The same as if I suddenly dropped a new flirm into the conversation. It'll short-circuit ever so slightly while your brain works out what I just said and tries to autocorrect it.
Like how I don't have a clue what the letter S is or the letter O is in Morse code, but I know that the thing from Nokia phones and the war means SOS.
Oh God! No. I've got to pedant you. I've got to pedant you.
Oh no!
That Nokia tone is ... .. which is SMS.
Oh,
that's smart.
Wow,
that's smart. Very good.
Well, like I said, I don't have a clue what S or O or M are in Morse code, and Tom has just live proven that.